Welcome to the RespectAbility webinar, How to Get Winning Media on Disability Issues. Your speaker for today's program is Jennifer Laszlo Mizrahi, President of RespectAbility USA. Audiocast quality is subject to equipment, available bandwidth, and Internet traffic. If you experience unsatisfactory audio quality, please use the telephone dial-in option provided in your confirmation and reminder emails. If you've dialed in, operator assistance is available by pressing #. You can send questions at any time by using the chat window located to the left of the presentation screen. A question and answer session will follow the presentation. Handouts for today's program can be downloaded using the program materials link in your confirmation and reminder emails or from the documents folder on the lower right of the presentation screen. I will now turn the call over to Jennifer Laszlo Mizrahi. Please begin.
Hello and welcome. I'm so delighted to have you all join this webinar. As the operator said, this is Jennifer Laszlo Mizrahi, and I'm the president of RespectAbility. And we're big believers in changing the perception of how people see people with disabilities. And to do that, the best way to do that is through the media, which is why we are having this conversation. I do have a media background, and although I'm relatively new to working full-time on disability issues, I just looked back on my own LinkedIn and I see that I have published about 55 op-eds on disability issues in the last 2 years. And so it's my goal to help each of you think through your media strategy. So the first thing you need to ask yourself is, why media? You know, all of you who are listening are very busy. Some of you are in the business of direct service for people with disabilities. Others are self-advocates as people with disabilities. And you have a very full plate, whether it is doing the work that you do to serve people with disabilities or just, your own work as a disability advocate to really succeed. Why have this other responsibility? Now, number one is really that you can, through the media, improve the lives of people with disabilities and all who want a welcoming, just, and respectful world. And it's really an opportunity to get your voice heard and the voice of the disability community heard. It's a chance to educate the public through facts and your personal experience, and it's an opportunity to change things on the ground, whether it's public opinion of the employers or it's improving legislation or policy. It really can impact the reality of people with disabilities. So let's take a look, because we're post the Americans with Disabilities Act now for 25 years. So over the 25 years since the ADA was passed, where have we gone in terms of employment outcomes? Well, the ADA is a fabulous piece of legislation for civil rights, but in terms of expanding economic rights and opportunities, we've actually gone backwards. This chart reflects the gap between people with and without disabilities in the workforce. We saw over these past 25 years that both women and minorities have made progress on employment, and because people with disabilities have remained stagnant with an out-of-workforce level of 70%, the gap between people with and without disabilities has indeed expanded. You can see on this next slide, depending on what the disability is, what the expected employment percent is in America. So if you have a hearing difference, you have a better potential employment outcome, on average 49%. But for people with self-care or independent living disabilities, people with much more involved disabilities, we're looking at employment outcomes as low as 15 and 16%. Again, no improvement, and in fact, they're going backwards in the 25 years since ADA. When you think about your own media strategy, you always want to be very local. So you'll see later there's links to data for every single state. So I'm just showing you one state as an example. So in the state of Michigan, you have people without disabilities are employed at a rate of 73.4%. However, for people with disabilities, it's under 30%, and you have these very large numbers of people who are living on benefits, who are living in poverty, et cetera, et cetera. What else is particularly interesting about Michigan is that when Michigan as a state had an opportunity to get drawdown money from the federal government to address this, they chose not to come up with their matching money. So every state can get matching money from the federal government. They put up $1 as a state, and the federal government puts up $4. Michigan actually chose to return $19 million to the federal government, even though they have these really significant levels of unemployment or out of employment for people with disabilities. So it's very important when you think about media to look at what the actual reality is in your state. Here again, charts for Michigan. And later in the presentation, you'll see there are links because we've done this for literally every single state in the country. So no matter where you're calling in from, you will have access to this data that you can use in your own press conferences, media kits, op-eds, et cetera. But you can see the difference in employment outcomes between people with disabilities and people without disabilities. But you can also see for poverty, for smoking, for obesity, and school dropout rates for your state, which is incredibly important. I do think it's also important that as you're doing media to know which states are leaving money on the table, because this is a news hook. You know, why is it that when there are so many people with disabilities in every state around the country, or so many states returning money to the federal government, and here you have a list of exactly which states and how much money they returned in the most recent year. By the way, Iowa, the state of Iowa, saw this and changed their policies, and this year will be pulling down their full match. Well, every other state should be pulling down their full match as well. One of the issues, of course, as we look at this, is it's because disability issues are not in the media. It's not even in the political discourse. This is a physical representation of how many times any given word was used at the national political conventions. This was done by the New York Times, and it's called a word cloud. So the size of the dot or the bubble, it mirrors how many times that word was used from the podium stage during the national conventions of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And the reason that this is relevant for you as you think about your media strategy is that the word disability was not even used in any significant way. So literally, you had almost no usage of the word disability. So how can you see really good policies for people with disabilities if people aren't even talking about it? And to get elected officials to talk about it, you need to be in the news yourself, and you need to have the right facts. Here's a chart that demonstrates how people across America view people with disabilities compared to other sorts of individuals. So you've got an XY axis here. So one axis is how competent people think a category of person might be, and the other is how warm they might perceive them to be. And so you see that they see that poor blacks or Arabs or feminists, not so competent, not so warm. For people who are quote-unquote disabled, or the R word, the retarded word, I didn't choose that word in this study that was done, by the way, by Princeton. I never would have chosen the R word, but they used the R word and they used disabled. And what you see is that people perceive people with disabilities as being very, very warm, but not at all competent. And this is really a problem that in your media you have to address, because people think if you have one disability that you have multiple disabilities, that if you happen to be on the autism spectrum that maybe, you know, there's a whole host of other things that we're not seeing, or if you're a wheelchair user that maybe you're just not that bright or not that quick of a thinker, and you might be the quickest and brightest person in the room. And so addressing in your media this issue of the underlying stigma that people with disabilities are not competent has to be a core part of your media strategy. So as you do your media strategy, you want to really be strategic about it. You want to spend as much time being strategic as actually implementing the strategy. Ask yourself the big questions. What are your media goals? Who specifically do you want to impact? In other words, if you were to get the perfect story in the evening news or the best op-ed, who would you want to see that story? Is it the employers who you want to hire people with disabilities? Is it the governor who impacts the budget for voc rehab perhaps? Or is it the local school officials? You need to be very specific about who is the audience you're trying to impact, because frankly, that suggests different parts of the newspaper or the news cycle or completely different media outlets. So for example, companies, you can go for the business section, the business section of your local newspaper, or the business reporter at your local TV station is different than the human interest story. Right now, disabilities is almost always covered by either the health correspondent or by the sort of features person. And if it's health, then it's going to be about there's a problem you need to solve, you need to cure and fix. It's the sort of the medical model. Or if it's the human interest story, generally what you're seeing is the pity frame of, oh, this sad, sad person with a disability. Isn't it nice? Pat that person on the back that that person got a job. Or isn't it nice that at the basketball game that they let little Johnny, who has quote-unquote special needs, hold the basketball and actually aim it at the basket and shoot and score a basket. So that's a human interest person. But if you want to impact employers, you want to be talking to the business reporter or the business section person to talk about that story. And if you want to really impact policy, you want to talk to the reporter who covers policy or perhaps who covers the state budget or the economy. So you need to be thinking about, before you even reach out to reporters, who are you trying to reach and where do they consume the news? When you also are doing this, you want to be focusing on the persuadables. So within any media outlet, you're going to have a number of reporters. Now, just by odds, it just really does not exist. There's any media outlet that doesn't have at least one person in the office who has a child with a developmental disability or a family member with a significant disability. Because 1 out of every 5 Americans has a disability, in every media office there's somebody with a disability. That person, if you can identify them, can often help you link to who are the right people in the media office. They can sometimes help you talk them into doing a story when they don't see it as the biggest news hook. There's basically 3 kinds of people who are customers for your message. And this is true whether you're dealing with employers or legislators or the media. There's 3 kinds. There's the Amen choir. That's our base. That's the disability community. That's the service providers, that already care about our issues. There's the people who will always be against us, people who think that perhaps it's not the role of government to enable people to get jobs, for example, or they might think that people with disabilities never have any ability. So don't spend your time speaking to them. You want to really focus on the persuadables, the people who you can move from being idle. These people are not against us. They generally aren't thinking about our issues, and you need to make it top of mind. Another thing to think about is that, they really, on the economy, with the economic reporters and the budget reporters, they like to think about winners. So you don't want to be showcasing, for example, a program that does discovery and very long process to help one person become employed 10 hours a week. That is not going to excite a business reporter, because they're going to see that of a lot of money spent without a significant ROI, return on investment. You want to look at the programs that are going to give you more people employed fewer people on benefits. So I call it the Jackie Robinson strategy. Those are programs that are going to take a young person with a disability coming out of school and enable them to have a lifetime of independence, or as much independence as they can get. So you're talking about programs like Project Search, you're talking about apprenticeship programs that might be at the place of a federal contractor or a large employer, and you're also talking about programs for people with newly acquired disabilities who already had work experience. But once you take a look at people who are long-term unemployed, they've been sitting on their couch for 20 years, on their parents' couch, and now their parents have died, and they're sitting on their brother's couch, and they're 45, 50 years old, and they're thinking, I might get a job, the likelihood of success for that person is not very high, and so you really want to focus on the people where you're going to see what the reporters and the elected officials will see as a high ROI. Again, that's a program like Project Search or an apprenticeship program at the site of a federal contractor or a big employer like, for example, Walgreens or Walmart. I mentioned these young people with disabilities. There's a lot of additional money around young people with disabilities through WIOA, but I can also tell you that philanthropists who want to invest in a better future for America love what they call, quote unquote, opportunity youth. But when they think about opportunity youth, they're thinking largely of people of color from sort of inner city neighborhoods who may be coming out of jail. They're not thinking about people with disabilities, even though the person who's an opportunity youth might also have a learning disability. They might have gone to jail in the first place because they grew up in a house that has lead paint. They might have be the child of a single mom who is addicted to crack, and therefore their disabilities are because of that circumstance. So you want to try and merge in with people who are excited about these quote-unquote opportunity youth. Plus, you know, reporters do love talking about young people and the future. Another thing you need to look at is the fact that there is a perception that people with disabilities do not want to work. So this represents a survey of over 3,800 people in the disability community, and the blue lines are people with disabilities themselves, and the red line is sort of the disability community, which would include, you know, people who are providers or family members of people with disability. And the question that they're asked is, which is more important to you, that I have a job and I am independent, or that there is a government safety net of benefits so that I or they will be taken care of in a case of need? And what we see is 71% of people with disabilities are saying that they really want a job as a top priority, and only 7% are saying that the safety net is what they care about most, or the most going to, you know, I don't know, or undecided. It's interesting to see the gap between people with disabilities and the people providing for them. The people with disabilities want the jobs more sometimes than the people around them want those jobs for them. So you have to really understand that. And that there's no partisan split. Why is that important? That's important because the news media loves to handicap political races. I mean, you turn on the TV, the election is not for a really, really long time. But every time you turn on the TV or open a newspaper, they're talking about Donald Trump or Jeb Bush or Hillary Clinton. Largely, they're assuming that all Democrats are going to, all people with disabilities are going to vote Democratic. But in fact, the 1 in 5 Americans with disabilities and their family members are swing voters. And this is something that can help us get a lot more press in the future. So just wanted to mention those things. And now, again, going back to the strategy of asking yourself, what kind of media do you want? And you don't need to be an either or. You can do all of the above. But there are different kinds. So an op-ed is what is opposite the editorial page. And we're going to talk more deeply about that. It's that column that you write, that 500 to 700 words. News stories can come in a variety of places, print, TV, radio, etc., for which you need to be thinking about what's the photo opportunity, what's it going to look like on screen. If the person with a disability is going to be talking on screen, will the viewer be able to understand them when they speak? Did you rehearse with that person so that they can get what they want to articulate down to a quick soundbite? That's a real problem. People without media experience, they have a tendency to be incredibly long-winded. And reporters want sound bites that are very, very short. So you actually need to practice coming up with sort of things that you say that are 8 words or less that sum up your point. You don't have to be a professional writer or PR expert to get a lot of press. You have to have a passionate about your opinion, and you wouldn't be on this call if you weren't. You have to have a desire to share and educate, and you have to have your facts. And again, you want your facts to be relevant to that publication, to their readers or their viewers. So if you're calling in from Philadelphia, the national statistics are not nearly as interesting than the Pennsylvania statistics or the Philadelphia statistics. And the same is true for every other state. When you think about what you're going to communicate, your number 1 rule is KISS. Keep it simple and straightforward. James Carville sort of coined this in the Clinton campaign the first time around. He called it keep it simple, stupid. I don't like to use that word, particularly talking about disability issues, so I changed it to keep it simple and straightforward. But don't use jargon, don't use technical terms, use your personal experience. Tell a story and make it very human. Think about religions, for example. Think about the fact that when Christianity was spreading, that Christianity had a story. There's Jesus, there's Mary, there's people in the story, and they created stained glass. And when you go into a church, you can see the pictures of those stained glass. Well, that essentially is a media opportunity from the Middle Ages. They didn't have TV, they didn't have Instagram. Stained glasses were their sort of photo opportunities, and you need to be thinking through what are yours as well. And you do that with your own words, and you want to use people first language, and you want to take advantage of news hooks. And unfortunately, in the disability community, there's always a news hook. There's always somewhere some person with a disability who was killed by a police officer because they had Down syndrome and they didn't understand what the police officer was saying, or like the situation in Baltimore where the individual there who was killed, who was African American, and it was constantly shown that he was black, but he was also a person with very significant intellectual and organizational disabilities due to lead paint poisoning when he was a child. There are frequently, there are these op-eds that give you an excuse to get your message out through the news hook of something else that's in the news cycle. If you're doing an op-ed and you've chosen to do an op-ed, you need to think through, again, where the publication is. Go online and look at the publication. How many words do they want? Usually they're very specific. They might want 500 to 700 words. They might want only 250 words. So if they only want 250 words, don't send them 600 words. You need to be really careful to give them what they want, and you need to be very concise. So you state your argument first. So I always like to write my headline first and write your argument, and then you want to have 3 to 5 facts to support your argument. There have been a lot of scientific studies. If you go beyond 6 facts, you lose your audience. Seriously, more facts than 6 is actually going to work against you. There have been tremendous psychological studies where they show that when you have between 3 and 6 different kinds of jam on a shelf, for example, somebody will pick one of them. You put 7 jars of different kinds of jam on a shelf, people will look, if they get overwhelmed, they shut down, they don't buy the jam. So you want to have between 3 and 5 facts. The best is to really come up with 3 facts that you're going to stick with, that are the most salient facts, and repeat them over in your different conversations with media. And don't be afraid to use your personal experience. If you're a person with a disability, talk about that. If you're the parent of somebody with a disability, or you have a lot of experience, you want to do that. And you want to be sure that your argument is consistent throughout your op-ed. Don't confuse people by saying, on the one hand, on the other hand. You want to really have a clear argument, and you want to go through every paragraph and say, is that interesting? Is that really important? Why should others care? And if they shouldn't care or they won't care, then cut it out. Just delete it. I find frequently that when I write op-eds, I write them that are way, way, way too long, and they take very little time to write. The time comes when you have to cut it down and you have to map the key points, and that takes a lot of discipline, but it's the most important thing is to keep it clear and short and have a very clear outline. And so again, you want to make sure people are aware of the many benefits of employing people with disabilities, and I don't mean the benefits for the people with the disabilities, I mean the benefits for the employers. How they can help make the companies more profitable because they're good talent and also they're loyal talent. Here's some facts that you can use. 1 in 5 Americans have a disability, for example. When you talk to the editor and they say, well, we don't really cover disability issues, it's not really an interesting story to us, you can just say, look, the majority of Americans either have a disability or a loved one with a disability. So your readers or your viewers are interested. They may not talk about this because disability is sort of where gay and other or sexual orientation issues were 20 and 30 years ago. They're still in the closet. People don't talk about it, but there's a lot more people with disability issues than there are people from the LGBTQ community, for example, and there's more people with disabilities than there are Hispanics or African Americans in this country, and it's costing taxpayers a lot to have a status quo system. I just gave you some more facts that you can put in terms of your article, some of the benefits of hiring people with disabilities, and some links to some academic studies that talk about what people perceive as those benefits, and also the Walgreens case study, which I love and is really worth going to. So these links are live links. You can download the PowerPoint and you can get more information from them. You always want to use name brand employers when you can. So think about if you're a voc rehab organization or you're a nonprofit, if you've got a known company that has a good reputation, whether it's EY or Walgreens or one of the others, then you want to drop names. It's very important because employers, they're really susceptible to peer pressure, and when they hear that companies that they respect are doing the practice of employing people with disabilities and find it successful, they're much more likely to follow suit than they are hearing, oh, well, it's really nice for Johnny who got a job and he has a disability, it's nice for him. They want to hear that for X employer, it's good for the bottom line. By the way, there is a link here to the USBLN. This is an organization that deals with businesses that are inclusive employers, and they have an index for who's really good at hiring people with disabilities. 19 companies nationally scored 100% on that. Those would be the companies in your area to go to first and see do they have a great story and want to be part of your story. It's also important to try and stick to the poll-tested messages. We've done focus groups and polling to find out what messages work best to bring excitement around hiring people with disabilities. And I think it's really important to show here on slide 25, look at the first message. Our nation was founded on the principle that anyone who works hard should be able to get ahead in life. People with disabilities deserve to be able to work to achieve the American dream just like anyone else. That is the #1 most successful message, and therefore you should memorize it, like these two that follow it, to use in your op-eds and to use in your media interviews. But I want to underscore one line in particular, the just like anyone else. By the way, we got that line from the marriage equality movement for gay individuals who wanted to be married, because we found that when it was gay marriage, people saw that as a special interest. But when it turned its name to marriage equality and they talked about being able to get married just like anyone else, that's when the support for it actually went up. So the lexicon makes a really, really big difference in what kinds of words and phrases you choose. And I want to underscore that because if you look at the top message there, and then we go to the next page and we see the bottom testing message, progress in science, healthcare, innovation, and better access to education has made Americans with disabilities more qualified than ever before. Americans with disabilities also have real abilities and want to work. Times have moved ahead. It's time for our workforce to do the same. You see that this message, which is factually accurate and to me sounds fabulous, it actually only works half as well with Americans as the first message. So don't make the mistake of using the words that don't work when we have national poll data that shows messages that do work. So let me just sum this up in what I call a message triangle, because you always want to try and get any media interview and any op-ed down to 3 core messages. Your message triangle, 3 messages. That's about as much as people really will listen to and absorb. So our nation was founded on the principle that anyone who works hard should be able to get ahead in life. People with disabilities deserve to be able to work to achieve the American dream just like anyone else, okay? Companies like Walgreens, EY, AMC, and others have shown that employees with disabilities are loyal, successful, and help them make more money. If we find the right jobs for the right people, it can and does increase the company's bottom line. So again, you want to find the companies who are doing it not because they're nice people and it's like a social justice thing to hire people with disabilities. You want to find the companies who are doing it because it's a talent acquisition strategy as a way to be a competitive organization or business. Number 3, and this message works especially well with Republicans, which won't surprise you, government policies that help people with disabilities get and keep jobs are win-win-win because they allow people with disabilities the dignity and financial benefits of work and also grow our economy and save taxpayer money. If you're in a very Republican area, talking about youth employment programs like apprenticeships at federal contractors, like the Project Search program, those save very big dollars in federal benefits money later and also in the state coffers because those people might get onto their employers' health care plans and not need Medicare and Medicaid. So the ROI, that taxpayer message, works very well in Republican states. You always want to mention your governor if you can for a variety of reasons. One of them is that the governor is the person most responsible at the end of the day for creating and approving your state plan for employment of people with disabilities, number 1. Number 2, they control the budget on a lot of other things, and governors have a search mechanism that they see every press clip that has their name in it. So if you want the governor to see what you're writing, put their name in it, and they will get it, and their advisors will get it in their daily press clips. Don't put their name in it, and they will never see your piece. And so you always want to mention your governor whenever possible, because again, you want to be in front of the decision makers, and the decision makers are doing Google searches every single day to see every single article that mentions themselves. Okay, this is like a trick that works very well. This is the link to all your state statistics. So no matter what state you're from, the PowerPoint is here. We have it both in PDF and in PowerPoint. These are fully accessible slides, and use your local data. Use superstars with disabilities. You can mention them in your articles to help prove that people with disabilities have skills. But superstars can be local people. It can be your local TV man, who's your anchor man. It can be your weatherman. It can be your local sports team's famous athletes. It can be a lot of people like that. And use celebrities. So how do you use celebrities? If you're doing a press event, one thing you can do is you can go to an employer who is doing a great job employing people with disabilities, but try and bring along a celebrity. It might be the quarterback from the big football team, or the star basketball player, or the weatherman, or whoever. You want to try and get a little celebrity power around the site visit of bringing the reporter or the editorial board to a site visit to see exactly what's going on. By the way, governors love to do site visits. So if you can invite your governor to come and see a site and then invite press to come when the governor is there, that's a great use of your media strategy. You want to carefully choose your employer heroes. Here's some examples. You can click on these links and find more of them. And also, thinking about employment, the new 503 rule is requiring federal contractors to have 7% of their folks be people with disabilities in all job categories. So if you look at the link that says Fed Spending website, you will see a link to all of the federal contractors in your area. It's organized by congressional district, so you can find out all the employers in your area that now have this new requirement that they're supposed to hire people with disabilities, which is helpful for media, and you can also name drop them in some of your op-eds. It's always great to talk about ADA. There's a lot of wonderful information about it. Actually, for some reason, I'm missing an important link, the ADA 25 tour that's going around with the legacy. I should have had that link in there also. But there are a lot of great places for information about ADA. But as a rule, reporters like to talk about the future and the present and not the past. So you can have it in there as a reference point and as a news hook, but really focus on the present and the future. As I mentioned, the political situation, the early primary states have huge numbers of people with disabilities and lots of issues about employment. So you can talk about that, and that you can look at the party identification as a news hook. Yes, it's ada25.com or adalegacy.com. Thanks, Tim, on the conference call who gave me the web link. I can't believe I missed it, but it's ada25.com or adalegacy.com. No downside for candidates to support these policies that are good for people with disabilities. I mean, nobody is against this. It's a 41-2 margin. It's overwhelming that elected officials and the public want to see good policies on employment for people with disabilities. And again, when you're pitching, you want to figure out where you want to go. So usually when you write an op-ed, it has to be exclusive to the one publication. So you want to pick the publication that is most relevant to your audience. So if it's an employer, it might be the business section of your local paper, or it might be a business magazine. If it's your governor, it might be the political publication that's much smaller in the state capital, for example. But no matter where you send it, you can only send it to one. Nothing will annoy editors more than they run your op-ed and see some other newspapers also running your op-ed. It needs to be exclusive. So you send it in, you follow up with your phone call, et cetera, et cetera. If they don't run it within 5 days, assume they're not going to run it, and you then give it to the next place. But you really want to get to know these people. You want to call them, you want to invite them to coffee, you want to invite them to a site visit and that sort of thing. And if you want to know where to send it, go to your local media outlets. Usually it's right on their website, but there's all kinds of ideas of places to send this to at this website. If you look on slide 39, there's this blue link, and you can really see a lot of places where you can get things published. I've got a number of examples of op-eds that have been published on employment of people with disabilities by myself or other folks. There's even some more here. And I really want to thank, though, also some PR firms that helped us with this and with other things. So Andrew Frank at Carved Communications, which is headquartered out of New York and also out of Los Angeles. Steve Rabinowitz, his company Blue Light Strategies in Washington, and also Jennifer Packer. All three of them contributed to this PowerPoint presentation and have given us PR advice in the past. So let me turn it over to questions, and I look forward to hearing what it is that I can help you with.
Participants who would like to submit questions can type a question in the chat box. Just type your message in the rectangular input field below the chat box and press enter to send it. If you've dialed in for audio and prefer to ask a verbal question, just press 7# on your phone to indicate you would like to speak.
So I'm hoping that you will ask questions and give me particular problems that I can help you solve. But let me say that our team has some wonderful young fellows here who have helped me collect facts and put together drafts of op-eds. And so literally in the past couple of weeks, I have personally submitted on behalf of RespectAbility op-eds to newspapers in every single one of America's 50 states. That's 50 different drafts of op-eds. And what I have found is that in many cases they say, great, the op-ed is 100% about our local state, but because you're not from our state, we will not publish this because we have a policy of only publishing things from people from that state. So, for example, we really need somebody from Vermont and from Arkansas, because both the newspapers in Arkansas and in Vermont have said that they would like to run a piece about the ADA, and that nobody locally has submitted an op-ed. And in fact, in most of the papers where we've reached out, they've said that nobody has reached out to them, and that's why they've been so eager to publish these op-eds. So we've published, I guess, 9 of them this week because nobody locally had sent in something, and they're really, really eager to have local people send something in. So Taylor asks, is there somewhere on the web where the webinar will be posted with the audio? Absolutely. All of our webinars we record, and we're very happy that we have live captioning. We will put this on YouTube. We have our own YouTube channel. We will also put it on our website in our past events. Eventually we'll have a transcript, and we'll clean that up even and have a cleaned up transcript, but we will have it on YouTube like all of our webinars so that other people can watch this at any time for free. But one of the downsides of using YouTube is you can see on YouTube, you can see the PowerPoint, but what you can't do is download the PowerPoint presentation and have all the links. So I encourage you to download the PowerPoint so that you have the links, because, for example, you do not want to miss out on this link here on page 39, which will give you the requirements, how many words and what the email is to submit an op-ed for a huge number of publications. And you do not want to miss knowing who are the local contractors, the Fed spending website, and you're not going to want to miss this of your local statistics and facts, because you want to make your op-ed or your press release talk about the local situation to the extent possible. Looking for other questions from the audience? Stacy asks, employers seem worried about their liability. Can you give some quick tips on effective response? Well, you know what, Stacy? They have a reason to be concerned about liability, and that is because sometimes the first response of people with disabilities is to sue their employers rather than come up with solutions first, or the employer didn't know what they were doing before they got into hiring someone with a disability. So there are a lot of ways to deal with this. First of all is to work with employers up front to make sure that there's a point person at the company that is the HR person, the human resources person, that is responsible for accommodations in a very centralized and professional way, that the HR person does that. There is a website called AskJan.org that provides a huge number of tips and techniques and skills for solving all kinds of problems in the workforce, and it's my favorite price, which is free. So making sure that there's a centralized person in a company who's the HR person responsible for accommodations is important proactively to make sure it works well, that they know about AskJan.org, that they're working with qualified, good experts from disability organizations, from providers, from Voc Rehab to get questions answered so that there's not a problem in the first place, that you don't have a situation where you're thinking, well, I've got individual X and I'm going to try and force an employer to hire him even though that person isn't right for the job. You need to work with the employer and say, what are the skills that you need in your talent pool? And then you need to find people with disabilities who actually have those skills or can be trained in those skills. But liability is an issue. And so you have to be honest with people. You can't build a good relationship with a reporter unless it's a relationship of trust. One thing that we've seen in Wisconsin and Iowa is that they have a partnership with a for-profit company called Manpower. Manpower is a temporary agency. They do temp to perm. So frequently the employer will take people with disabilities as a temp. If it doesn't work out, they don't keep the employee. And that way there's no legal liability for the employer. And there's a lot of companies that have apprenticeship programs or training programs where they sort of do a selection process before any job is hired to make sure the fit is in the right way. But you don't want to, Pollyanna-ish. Yes, there are situations where people with disabilities are better at the job than everyone else. But let's not pretend that everyone is Stephen Hawking, because they're not. People with disabilities can be fabulous and they can be less fabulous. They can be happy and cheerful and they can be less happy and cheerful. They're human beings. What we do have going for us are a couple of characteristics that make us, people with disabilities, a better hire in many cases. One of those is that we've had to innovate throughout our lives because there was something that other people could do that we can't do because maybe we're blind or we have mobility issues or we're not hearing. We've learned about innovation, and it's ingrained really in our DNA or in our daily habits that makes us particularly good at innovation. Number two is that we tend to be, on average, more loyal. And in industries where there's more job turnover, that can be fabulous. So for the hospitality industry of working in hotels, working in hospitals, working in distribution centers, people with disabilities significantly outperform people without disabilities simply because they don't quit their jobs. They get the job, they get trained in the job, and they stay in the job, and employers save a lot of money. And the question from Michelle is, are the local statistics fairly up to date? Yes, they are. I mean, there will be more up-to-date statistics that will come out in a couple of months, but these are the most up-to-date statistics that are currently publicly available. And Taylor asked, when do you think the transcript and video will be posted? It usually takes a couple days for the video to be posted. The person who does the transcript actually happens to be on vacation, so it'll be a little bit longer on that. But the transcript, in that the words of what I'm saying will be on the screen on the YouTube video, that will be there as soon as we have that. I want to really encourage you to sell this as good for the employers and not to sell this as good for people with disabilities. You want to be in the position of solving problems in the community that they're already interested in. And they're interested in helping companies succeed. They're interested in man bites dog stories. And by the way, the disability story is a man bites dog story, in that people perceive that people with disabilities don't want to work, but 70% of people with disabilities do want to work. People perceive that people with disabilities can't do the job. But as we can see from the data from the Walgreens study that I showed you, that I really think you should read, it's fabulous, and from other studies that I showed you, you can really see that people with disabilities can be really outstanding at their jobs, and pointing that out is very, very important. Other questions? Do you want to dial in? Operator, can you explain again how people can ask questions?
If you've dialed in to hear the audio, you can press 7#, that's 7, followed by the pound sign on your telephone keypad to indicate that you're waiting to ask a question.
So I want to also note that I'm happy to help you personally with your op-eds. So my email is jenniferm@respectabilityusa.org. That's jenniferm@respectabilityusa.org. And if you email me and say I want to work on it, I'm happy to look at your outline. It's always good to start with an outline. What's the headline that you want? What are your facts? What are your messages? You can literally take word for word those messages from the message triangle that I gave you. Just absolutely steal them word for word because they work, and run them in your local publications and use them in your media interviews. I'm happy to help you edit your op-eds before you submit them. But you need to do a little homework. You need to think about who's the audience that you want. What's the point that you want to make? What would success look like? Imagine the news story that's going to come out of your press conference that you're going to do at your ADA event. Imagine, the person who's going to be consuming that media, and see what it is that'll take you to get there. So I just want to repeat that my email is jenniferm@respectabilityusa.org. I want to thank the conference call company and our captionists because they're a pleasure to work with. And I want to thank all of you who have come to our call, really, and been involved in this webinar. It is something where we really, really, really need your help. Again, I took the time to write an article for every single state in the country, and some of those states will not run them because I'm not from there. So if you say, you know what, I'm from state X, and I still, after hearing this webinar, am intimidated, and July 26th, the ADA anniversary is really soon, I'm not sure if I can pull this off. It may be that I've got an op-ed ready and waiting for you, and all you have to do is a few tweaks and submit it under your own name. We are here to help you at RespectAbility. We're a relatively new nonprofit organization. I want to encourage you to spread the word to others and to really be involved with this. We're going to be very involved in the presidential campaign as well. I want to also invite you to look at this brand new blog that we have. It's called The RespectAbility report.org. I'm very proud of it. Our fellows have been interacting directly one-on-one with presidential candidates, self-advocates, and disability advocates, doing a fabulous job. So please be involved with us. Thank you for joining us today, and I want to thank you for all you do every day for people with disabilities. And that concludes our call.
Thank you, Jennifer. This concludes today's RespectAbility webinar. Thank you all for attending.